implications for ecosystem service supervision. And this is collaborative work with colleagues at the Center for the Study of Institutions, Population, and Environmental Change at Indiana University, by Barzil Fisher and Sean Smith, who has done the work on the remote sensing and climate change detection analysis. Just a brief outline of the topics that I'll cover and touch upon in my talk. Conceptual approach to take the methods, results, and some directions for future work. In this study, we're interested in the management of privately owned forests, which in the United States comprise about 2/3 of all forests. And in some states, that share is even higher. And the study site for this project, Indiana, the state of Indiana, that's about 86%. And the health and sustainability of these privately owned and managed forests depends on the stewards, which comprise a growing and very diverse group of private landowners. And so most states in the United States rely on a mix of incentives programs, and education to encourage the management, sustainable management of private forests, and only 15 states have a regulatory framework. And in this study, our approach is slightly different. We're looking at how the decisions and choices of forest landowners are shaped by social contact and social interactions. And we are asking two main research questions. What type of social contacts, size, and diversity of networks characterize the personal networks of private landowners? And the second question would be how the structure and composition of these networks shape the decisions and practices on private lands. And why are we interested in the decisions of private forest landowners? Because the choices that they make with regard to particular land management activities have implications for the ability of the land to sustain important ecosystem functions and provide a range of ecosystem services. And we've heard about the wide range of ecosystem services, in particular in this case from forest ecosystems. Borrowing from the literature on local public economies, I don't know how much of you would recollect that period of Lynn's work. The literature distinguishes between the provision and production as well as consumption of public services. In this case, we're looking at the provision of ecosystem services, which includes the conservation of existing forests as well as the establishment of new forests on private lands. Similarly, production of ecosystem services would include activities, practices, and actions to conserve existing forests as well as to establish new forests on private lands. But because of the focus of this project and the fact that many of these decisions and activities are socially embedded, we can talk about the co-provision and co-production of ecosystem services. And to follow this line of thought, private forest stewardship is shaped by human behavior, which is socially embedded and influenced by everyday social interactions. And we're borrowing from social network approaches here, thinking about social networks as the basic mechanism through which landowners' attitudes and decisions are shaped. And the contribution of this approach to the study questions is that individual landowners act as sociosyncratic individuals. And just to give you an example, you see harvesting happening on one private parcel, and not long afterwards you might see similar activity, harvesting happening nearby. So people are acting, but also reacting to their social and as well as ecological environment. The way we looked at land on a personal networks is from the perspective of an ecocentric network, which is different from the study of co- or sociocentric networks. Just to clarify this, the focus on the focus of ecocentric networks is on the relationships between a focal actor, an ego, and the members in his or her network. And there are three important aspects of networks or personal networks. This is the structure, the size and type of relationships, the content, but also the function of the network. And interplay of these three aspects, network aspects, can give us an idea of the influence of that personal network on resource management decisions. As I mentioned earlier, there's a diverse group of private landowners, and we could expect that this diversity might lead to differences and similarities in the personal networks of private landowners. Relative to three dimensions in the study, we looked at recent management activity as one of the criteria, and we know that most of the landowners in the United States are passive managers that react to market, forest, and or personal circumstances, as opposed to actively managing actively planning or acting. And this is from a recent empirical study. So we think that the personal networks of landowners might vary based on the management profile, active versus passive managers. We also know that the personal communication with members of the forestry community may influence the expectations of individuals towards forest management. One of the sources of variation would be whether the landowners, the private forest landowners, have used natural resource professionals as a source of information. For example, professional foresters, agricultural county agents, wildlife biologists. And finally, there are other more local context-specific factors that might influence and lead to differences in the personal networks of these forest owners. As mentioned, different contexts can circumscribe different sets of networks. And to give you an example, in one of the counties in the study, there's an existing requirement, there's a permit system that requires landowners to obtain a permit before harvesting timber on the land. So such legal requirements might act as an intervening, conditioning factor on the type of social interactions and relationships that we are observing. The study, just briefly about the study area, these are two counties in the south-central part of Indiana. I'm working in Monroe County, and there's a mix of both small-scale forest as well as agricultural land use. Similarly to other regions in the Midwest, there's residential housing expansion, but also recent empirical studies show that there is a reforestation, especially on small parcels, and peri-urban reforestation. So it's an interesting mix of trends that we see in other places. The primary data source for this study is 42 semi-structured phone interviews with private forest landowners. And two supplementary sources of data include a structured household survey conducted by colleagues at the Center for the Study of Institutions and Population and Environmental Change and an area of water interpretation. So we selected 42 private forest owners using a stratified purposeful sample. And these were drawn from a pool of 600 individuals who had agreed to be contacted by phone for a follow-up conversation in the survey that I mentioned that was conducted in 2008. And we used three criteria to stratify our sample based on the previous propositions that I laid out. Harvesting activity as an indicator of activity, yes, no. Use of natural resource professionals, as well as the two counties. The survey, I have to mention, was conducted in 6 counties in the South Central part of the state. And we used network derived measures, network size and diversity in a case-based analysis using an exploratory mainly data tools. And I'm going to walk you through some of the results from this exploratory data analysis. This graph represents the distribution of the landowner network size, and you can see that for the group of 42 individuals, the average number of network contacts was about 4 people. So on average, a landowner had 4 contacts with others, and there's no clear pattern of the distribution of the size in terms of the county, in terms of the local context. Next, we looked at how the average size is distributed based on 2 of the stratifying criteria, activity and use of natural resource professionals. There are a few things to notice here. For the group of 11 landowners, the average network size was about 5 people, which was the largest one, compared to about 2 people on average for people who have done there's no recent activity, no recent harvesting activity, and no use of resource professionals. And if you compare people who have used natural resource professionals, the upper half, versus those who have not, there's on average a difference of 2 network members between those groups. But something else to note here is that this reflects data collected at a certain point in time, and these categories are flexible and fluid all the time, and so individual forest owners can switch from one group to another all the time. That's important to keep in mind.